Redditors who clean up crime scenes. What's the most bizarre thing you've witnessed? 1. Crime scene cleaner here. My first suicide cleanup was quite an experience. Man shot himself in the head in his garage. I'll never forget needing to use pliers to pull teeth and skull fragments out of the drywall behind where he sat, or that blood and brain managed to make its way more than 50 feet across the garage. Most disturbing though, was his pickup. We chose to take it to our company wash bay to pressure wash it and make sure it was as clean as possible. I cleaned it myself, and was satisfied that I had done well. Inspected for blood and couldn't find anything, so I began driving it back to the owner's garage. On the way back a slight drizzle began and switched on the wiper blades. Imagine my horror as a chunk of brain streaks across my newly cleaned windshield. I pulled over quickly and cleaned it up, but it still makes me sick to think what would have happened if it didn't rain that day. This man's poor wife or daughter would have been met with that sight and been crushed again by the impact of suicide. That 10 years ago and I'll never forget it. Now I triple or quadruple check every job. 2. I don't clean up crime scenes, but I do remove the deceased. I can get into more accurate detail of the deceased, but here's some general stuff. Dirt hoarders are a lot more common than they really should be. First of all, and it's never a clean hoard. It's piles of junk covered in several types of urine, shit and vomit. Molds I've never seen before, and probably insects that haven't even been discovered yet. I understand when the emergency services don't want to be in that kind of house longer than they have to, but I'll never forget having to ask them to help me because I couldn't distinguishing what was actually the deceased, and what was just a piles of random shit that looked more human than the deceased did. Dirt people will warn you bodies will bloat, and touching them the wrong way will make them leak. But the image you're conjuring up doesn't even hold a light to what it can be like. Insects skittering when you delicately lift a 400-pound deceased onto your cot, because one wrong move and they will start oozing. Darto, and the ones who had pets who were so desperate they had to eat their owner. Staring into the eyes of a big, brown-eyed mutt who is happy to finally receive human contact, and all you can't think about is how the deceased is missing their entire face. Poor things were just hungry, but it's unsettling. 3. My job is to clear landmines. I clean war crimes. You can say, yay. Bit of a stretch, I know. And X200B. Recently a cow had walked into a minefield in our area of operations, and stepped on a small anti-personnel mine. However, this mine was boosted by having been buried on top of a directional fragmentation mine. Gamers and soldiers, think Claymore, but bigger. The cow had literally been split in half, with cow intestines spread all over the area and hanging from trees like Hannibal's Christmas ornaments. Edit. Love the puns. 3. 4. Family member did heavy duty cleaning including crime scenes. A guy shot his head off with a shotgun. EMTs were supposed to pick him up, literally, but missed a large chunk of brain behind a couch. That was when said family member decided to find other engagement. I can relate to this. FFEMT. Respond to suicide with a rifle. He dead. Nothing for us to do but pronounce. Cops cover the body, then want to escort the family out of the death scene because everyone is processed like a crime scene regardless and it is the only way in or out of the property. Before they did so, though, my partner had to point out the guy's remarkably intact brain just sitting in the tree over his body. Another one just came to mind. Drunk driver hits a tree, wasn't wearing his seatbelt and was ejected. Well, most of him anyway. His leg remained in the car while the rest of him departed it. One of only 2 traumatic amputations of major limbs I've seen survive. Fingers and toes all the time. Legs. No. We were called to return to the scene after delivering him to the hospital because the cops didn't know what to do with his leg. And before anyone asks, no, there was absolutely no chance of reattachment. In fact, the challenge was figuring out how to get it out of the car it was trapped in. Don't drive drunk, boys and girls. And for crying out loud, wear your goddamn seatbelts. All the morons going I'd rather be thrown clear obviously haven't seen what happens to the people who are. We see it all the time. Really ducked up for life people if they survive, but most don't. 5. I occasionally work on the weekends for a funeral home. It's decent money for what is essentially 2 hours of call out work when their normal staff is off. Last year I was called in at around 5 in the morning. A 30-something-year-old guy had killed himself, shot himself, in a pretty small 2-bedroom apartment. That wasn't the bizarre part at all since I've seen it before on call-outs. What was bizarre was what was in the apartment. Literally thousands of documents, piled on the floor, on a desk, on shelves, of people's financial information, credit card statements, bank statements, personal data, etc. Probably 3,000 folders with all this stuff in it. Even where there weren't piles of folders, there were just loose papers, magnetic cards, surveillance cameras. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And of course, some of these documents and folders had blood and brains spattered all over them. Didn't matter to me though, since the detective on scene had said it was fine to take the body. The police had to clear a path by collecting the papers from the route we would take from the door to the apartment to where he was. A couple of months later, it came out that the guy had over $1 million in cash and Bitcoin. Apparently the state police were onto him. So he killed himself. BC the state police were onto him. Or was someone trying to get after his money and the whole thing was a setup? Also, any follow-up since then? Lastly, it came out that the guy had $1 million in cash. That was nice of the police to turn in the 000 that was left at the scene. I can't believe he was carrying 000 cash like that. No wonder the police were after him. He was probably up to something suspicious if he just had 000 in cash. You're very right. It's very odd that he had 000 in cash just lying around. But if that's how he wants to store his 000 cash, then who are we to judge? 6. My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood, then finished the job. 7. Was dispatched to a vehicle versus pedestrian call a couple months ago, and when we arrived on scene it was like something out of a movie. Dude was running across a fairly busy 4-lane road and was hit by a car traveling about 55 miles per hour. After his head went through the windshield of the first vehicle, he then proceeded to be thrown into the opposite lane and was ran over and dragged about 20 yards by another vehicle. Once the coroner was on scene with traffic investigations, we proceeded to pick up his organs bit by bit. It was a fantastic anatomy lesson. 8. I used to work in forensics, picking up decedents as well as assisting the medical examiner in conduction of the autopsy. Not necessarily cleaning up the scene, but I've seen a guy who, during some kind of psychotic break, completely castrated his entire package. He then proceeded to stuff the entire package into his mouth and down his throat. He then slit his own throat. Did all of this with a cheap kitchen knife in his shower. Cause: exsanguination complicating transverse carotid and jugular severance. Manner: suicide. Edit: just want to address anyone who is asking about it potentially being a homicide and give a little bit more background info. I was reluctant at first to give out too much detail, but here is what I'll offer. There was a call to a Section 8 development about a man down the hall acting extremely erratically. He had no known history of drug abuse and no diagnosed psychiatric illnesses. His mother, whom he lived with, as well as many of the neighbors, called 911 multiple times and first responders were allegedly taking their sweet time getting to the scene. He lured his mother out into the hallway, and then ran back into the apartment alone and locked the door behind him. He then ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, went and turned the shower on, and did the deed. He was picked up by EMS and brought to a local hospital where he was pronounced DOA due to his injuries. No preliminary toxicology was conducted by the hospital. His remains were then picked up by us for examination. Unfortunately for the conclusion of the story, this happened on one of my last days of work after I already put in my 2 weeks notice. Thus, I don't have access to the post-mortem toxicology report to find out why he did it. If the tox is negative for illicit substances, we may, and will likely never know why he actually did it. My personal hypothesis was that he suffered from some form of developmental disorder, and combined with a latent psychiatric illness of some sort, compounded with an unresolved body gender dysmorphia complex, was unable to cope with his feelings and broke. Cause: Exsanguination complicating transverse carotid and jugular severance. Thanks. I always wanted to know the technical term for doing that. 9. User T-Mop. Propane nat gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body. No anything. Just an arm. Preemptive edit. It was his left arm. So the arm was left? Right. 10. I don't clean them for a living but had to clean a few apartments when my uncle managed an apartment complex. We had one tenant OD on heroin. He sat there for roughly 3 weeks before anyone noticed the smell. They took his body and left it to us to clean up. The dude vomited on the ceiling. There were little dry droplets of vomit all over the ceiling right above where he died, and to top it off he basically liquefied and left a puddle of gut juices on the concrete foundation underneath the carpet. I thought that shit was left to a professional team, but I guess it's optional, and if you don't want to pay for it, you can scoop the brains and blood up yourself. 11. Okay, not a crime scene cleaner but I'm a medic. Have a few bizarre ones. Came into a home to find a man who had attempted to commit suicide by putting a pistol under his jaw but failed. Had a second thought. He ended up having to crawl 5 feet away to where he had thrown the pistol after only blowing the left side of his face off to finish the job. The second one did the trick. Just about every surface in his living room had some remnant of the poor guy. He left behind 2 kids. Another time we had a husband who had caught his wife cheating and had turned on the garbage disposal and forced her arm down it. Massive hemorrhaging, but unfortunately she was D.O.A. Husband ended up with a self-inflicted shotgun wound. People really don't understand just how messy a shotgun can make things. Think the Hulk smashing a blood and brain-filled Pinata. And this one was more weird than anything, but here goes. Older gentleman we were called to after police performed a wellness check. Late 70s. Nice house. Nice foreign car in the driveway. Pictures of prayers and crosses all over the house. We head into the bedroom and there he is naked except for what I assume was one of those sexy non-Halloween costumes. Honestly I don't know, but he ended up having a heart attack mid-pleasure time while choking himself with a rosary. Definitely one of the weirdest things I ever saw during my time working the box. 12. Okay, here is another story that will always stick out. The entire residence was absolutely tossed, as if someone was looking for something. However, this wouldn't end up being a typical robbery turned homicide. This was about to be way more bizarre. We get the man into the bag so crime scene can take their photos. In the nearby toilet, we discover even more blood. Possibly up to at least a third of this gentleman's entire volume of blood in the john. It was just around that exact moment where another patrol officer was perusing around the residence when he started to find random objects covered in fecal matter. Eventually, he found more objects with a mix of fecal matter and blood. It then hit us just exactly what we were dealing with. Extreme violent sodomy with foreign objects. Most of the objects were reasonable, I suppose. Smaller objects resembling the phallic shape, TV remotes, things of that like. Well, 3 of the objects stuck out that were discovered are what make this story. The first was a broom. Sure, you think, kinda skinny, right? Can't be that bad. Well, it was the depth up the grip of it that we were concerned about. This man definitely had his bowel perforated by how deep this thing went. The second object of note was a baseball bat, the contact end of it. Again, pretty deep, but significantly wider in girth. The final and most standout of the objects was a guitar. A really nice Stratocaster too. The tuning end of a guitar. The tuning knobs were all covered in a thick paste of fecal matter and blood. This man had been sodomized to death. At autopsy, the findings were obvious. However, what I had to do was something I'll never forget. After the primary evisceration was complete, the doctor wanted to completely excise the rectum. So I had to don a chainmail glove and, after rolling this poor guy onto his side, press inside his abdominal cavity to press his rectum out towards his anus till the doctor could pull it taut enough to cut out. After she had his guy's rectum out, which resembled one of those jelly-filled toys that when you hold them they kinda fall inside themselves and through your hands. My 80s 90s baby friends should recall these guys. We then cut lengthwise up it to unfold the rectal tissue into a large rectangle to see the extent of the internal lacerations. Needless to say, deep, extensive, and numerous. The assailants have been apprehended. So that's the story about how I had to cut out a guy's butthole for science, medicine, and law. TLDR. Man is murdered from being sodomized with the tuning end of a guitar. The people responsible have been caught. Edit. Thank you very much to whoever awarded me the platinum medal. It is a travesty that I had to acquire such a thing from sharing such a grotesque story, and I will see to it that my currency coins. Sorry, kinda new to Reddit honestly, not too sure how this whole thing works, are given out to equally endearing folk sharing their experiences with the internet. Edit. Thank you very much for the silver and gold. Final edit. It appears I have actually mixed two different former cases into one. I have redacted any details that were not related to the guitar case. In that job, a lot of cases tend to blend together, especially when they're extremely similar. It was a while ago, so I got some of the specifics wrong. The post now only contains bits of the story that again are relevant to the guitar case, and all information contained within this post can be found publicly if you look hard enough. 13.